welcome to the lecture series on Introduction to Indian Philosophy. Today I will introduce you to Buddhism. Buddhism is a complex system of thought. Although people make impulsive statements about the system and label it as pessimistic and negative because of its declaration that the world is full of suffering, and it is an axiomatic truth. But as we go on to understand this system, you will know how inappropriate these comments are. The strength of Buddhism lies in its exhaustive interpretation of samsara, its forceful ethics, and its irrefutable dialectics. Generally, people regard Gautam Buddha as the founder of Buddhism, but this is not true. Let me clarify certain things. In Buddhism, the term Buddha means the enlightened one. It refers to the one who, through his own intellectual power, has been able to discover the great truths. And Gautam Buddha happens to be the last in the series of the Buddhas, or the seers of truth, who revealed the path of nirvana to the world. In the Jatakas, 24 mythical Buddhas are cited who perhaps existed before Gautam Buddha. In the Buddhist text Buddha Vamsha, the number is 27. While according to Lalit Vistara, which again is a Buddhist text, the number of the Buddhas goes up to 55. So, Buddha is not a name but a title. What is philosophically interesting here is that the doctrines of Buddhism are established on facts which we can associate with. There is no dependence on the divine, eternal, all-powerful Creator. So, Buddha is not God. He is an ordinary human being with extraordinary knowledge. He has grasped the nature of reality, which is suffering. And because he is full of compassion and love for all living creatures, he is on a mission to teach people how this suffering can be removed or stopped. Now, in order to become a Buddha, one must go through a long, strenuous and difficult path, which is basically the preparatory stage. And in this stage, he is called the Bodhisattva, meaning a being moving towards nirvana or enlightenment. Now, I just said that Buddhism does not believe in an all-powerful creator God, but we do get to read about the existence of many, and you can say impermanent gods, who are a little better version of human beings. In the sense, they are more powerful, longer living, and can perhaps grant some benefits to those who worship them. But as far as their role in the attainment of nirvana is concerned, they are of no help. In fact, even the Buddhas cannot grant nirvana to anyone. They can only lead them to the path and show them the way which brings an end to all suffering. So, without the involvement of any absolute God, Buddhism gives a theory of karma, which of course involves the belief in rebirth and wandering in the 6 worlds mentioned in the Buddhist literature. I will explain what it means. One thing is clear, that a person has to bear the consequences of the actions he performed in his previous lives. which means death is not the end. A person will be reborn either as a human or a god or an animal or an inhabitant of hell, depending on the extent of suffering he has to undergo. A person may even enjoy the bliss of heaven if his actions in previous lives were morally good. Anyway, the 6 worlds which Buddhism talks about are: at the bottom is the hell. A person whose previous life was full of evil acts goes to hell. Here he is subjected to various kinds of tortures. Then above the hell is the world of animals. Again, in order to suffer the wrong deeds performed in the previous life, one is born as an animal in the next life. And you know, it's not a great world to be born into. The third is the Pretalok, or the world of hungry ghosts. Born into this world, one hovers around the world of humans, as it is more likely that the one born in the Pretaloka was a human being in the past life who is still desperately attached to his possessions and craves for them. And the fourth is the world of titans or demons or the Rakshasas. This world belongs to those who seek power. Violence is what motivates them. So, they are unstoppable as far as their desire for power is concerned. The fifth is the human world, which cannot be attained easily. This world is important because it is here alone that spiritual progress is possible. And one gets it if one has performed primarily good actions in the past life. And the sixth is heaven. According to Buddhism, although heaven is attained by performing all morally right actions, it is still not better than the human world. Because in heaven, while leading a blissful life, one in all possibility may become complacent and therefore unconcerned about the spiritual path. So, human life is to be celebrated as it keeps one mindful of or alive to the realities of life. As there are continuous warnings and indications in the form of old age, death, diseases, etc. A need for a permanent solution can be felt only by a human being. Now, you can see the 6 realms of existence in this picture. Above is the heaven, and at the bottom you will see the hell, and on the sides there are the human world, the world of hungry ghosts, the world of titans, and the animal world. In a way, we can say that human life best displays the Buddhist doctrine of the Madhyama Pratipat, meaning the middle path, neither too much suffering nor too much pleasure. So, the important thing that the system asserts is that one has to suffer the consequences of one's actions. And it is not possible to endure the sufferings in just one lifetime. There could be many lifetimes till the accumulated karmas are finally exhausted. If you remember, I discussed this middle path doctrine in my last lecture on Jainism. Gautam Buddha was against both the extremes of living a life of pleasures and the practice of extreme austerities. The best course of action is when everything is done in moderation. One need not deny oneself the pleasures of life, but one must not at the same time indulge to excess in them. Before I move further, let me narrate to you how Siddharth Gautam became Gautam Buddha. Before the Gautam Buddha was to be born, the Bodhisattva or the future Buddha made a few considerations. The first was regarding the time, as in, what would be the most suitable time for a Buddha to be born? And he decided that the most appropriate time would be when the mortals would be in a position to comprehend the teachings of the tradition, like the truth about suffering, the transitory character of things, and the non-substantive or essenceless nature of reality. The second consideration was about the place where Buddha was to be born. And it was decided that since Buddha was always born in the continent of India, this time too it would be India. And it would be the middle region of India, the city called Kapilavastu. The third consideration was the family into which Buddha was to be born. And it was decided that the family would be of the warrior caste, as it was highest in the rank at that time, which would help in making an impact on people. Then he thought about who the mother of the Buddha would be. And it was decided that Queen Mahamaya would be his mother, as she was fully developed in both ability and character. Thus, the future Buddha was born to Queen Mahamaya and King Shuddhodhana of the Shakya clan. And when he was born, the wise men told the king that his son would become a Chakravarti king if he would stick to the life of a householder, but if he renounced the world, he would become a Buddha and remove the veil of ignorance from the world. The king was upset at the thought of his son renouncing the world. So he asked the wise men about the signs that would indicate that his son is about to renounce the world. And they answered that when the prince will encounter 4 kinds of people: number 1, a frail old man; 2, a sick man; 3, a dead man; and 4, a monk, that would be the sign of his renouncing the world. Now the king made sure to not let any such person come in front of the prince. And he deployed guards in all the 4 directions so that neither of these 4 kinds of people came across his son. And he also arranged for beautiful women to take care of the prince so that he only sees elegance, luxury, glory, nobility all around the palace. When Prince Siddhartha turned 16, his father got 3 palaces made for him in accordance with the 3 seasons. All 3 palaces were lavishly decorated and furnished with all sorts of luxuries. There were thousands of dancing girls and servants to serve the prince and his beautiful wife Yashodhara. The prince not just indulged himself in the pleasures of the palace, but also proved himself to be a master in the art of archery. Once Prince Siddhartha wished to go to a park and asked his charioteer to get the chariot ready for him. Just imagine the affluence. The charioteer brought a lavish chariot with white healthy horses harnessed to it. The prince ascended on the chariot, and the chariot made its way towards the park. Now, the time for Prince Siddhartha to become Buddha was nearing, and the first sign appeared before him. On his way to the park, Prince Siddhartha saw a crippled, grey-haired, broken-toothed, frail old man leaning on a staff. In a state of shock, he asked his charioteer who this man was. When the charioteer told him that this is what happens when a person becomes old, the prince, in an agitated manner, said, "Shame on birth, as anyone who is born will get old one day." Then, a little further ahead, he saw a diseased man, a sick man, helpless and agonized. Again, he asked the charioteer about this man, and on getting the answer, he felt troubled and distressed. The chariot went on ahead, and this time the prince saw a dead man. Horrified, heartbroken, he proceeded further. Then he came across a man dressed in an unusual manner, and when he inquired about him, the charioteer said that he is a monk and he has renounced the world. This time the prince was pleasantly surprised. The monk, in a way, inspired him to seek spiritual solutions for the painful human conditions he just witnessed. Now, this was the day Rahul, the son of Prince Siddharth, was born. There were festivities in the palace. While everyone was celebrating, Prince Siddharth was not the same anymore. He was transformed. He had developed aversion towards passions. His mind was on a different path altogether. He wanted to get out of the claws and clutches of passion, false beliefs, the fires of hatred and lust. He was feeling oppressed and stifled by the sight of such passion-laden people. The palace looked like a place packed with dead bodies. The thoughts of the first 3 men he saw on the way were consuming him. He impatiently wanted to renounce the world and find answers to questions that were troubling him. And ultimately, he took the radical decision to leave his family and become a wandering seeker. Before leaving the palace, he went to the room where his newborn child was sleeping with his mother. The prince gazed at the two and stopped himself from waking them up, as he knew that his wife would stop him from doing what he had decided to do. And he said to himself that once he gets the answers to his questions, he will come back to see his son. He was 29 at this time. He first went to Rajagriha on foot, and when he got tired and felt hungry, he begged for food. And after collecting enough food for his sustenance, he exited from the city. Now, as he tried to eat that food, he felt a great disgust towards it, as he was not used to having such food in the palace. But immediately he reproached himself for having such feelings and told himself that it is this what he wanted. And soon his disgust disappeared and he ate his food. From there he went to the hermitage of his first teacher, Alara Kalama, who taught him the various meditational techniques. Siddhartha quickly learned the technique of entering into the state of trance, which was a serene and blissful experience of nothingness. But this did not satisfy him, because this is not what he wanted to seek. He did not leave his palace and family for this. These meditational techniques did not offer a permanent solution to the human problems. Once one exited these meditations, one would be back in the big, bad world of birth, disease, old age, and death. Dissatisfied, he went to another teacher named Uddaka Ramaputta. Here, Siddhartha learned more sophisticated techniques. Using these techniques, he could reach a state in which consciousness itself disappeared. But these two did not appeal to him, as these mystical states of consciousness were good only till they lasted. But what after that? He then sought the help of another teacher who taught him extreme austerities for controlling one's appetites and passions. First, he learned to control his breath. But this practice of controlling his breathing, instead of benefiting him, gave him severe headaches. So he gave it up. Then he tried the technique of minimizing his food intake, to the extent that sometimes he would just take 1 grain of rice. Now, these austerities made him abnormally weak. He began to lose his hair and experienced constant body aches. So, Siddhartha was convinced that these meditational techniques and extreme austerities would not lead him to enlightenment. But these 6 years of Siddhartha, after he left his palace, made him realize that extremes of any kind do no good. Just as his previous life of an indulgent prince was unfruitful and frustrating, so were these 6 years of austerities. So, the most suitable and proper course of action for him would be that of following the middle path, in which one neither indulges nor denies himself of something. So he started begging food from the nearby villages and practiced meditation. And on a certain day in Bodh Gaya, when Siddhartha sat for meditation under the Bodhi tree, cross-legged, in an unconquerable position, something happened. In the first part of the night, he acquired knowledge of his previous existences. In the middle part of the night, he got the divine eye with which he could see the conditions of human beings in view of their karmas. And in the last part of the night, he perceived and decoded the dependent origination of things. And thus he was awakened and had attained nirvana and became Buddha. Gautam Buddha. He was 35 years then. In the introduction to the Jatakas, it is written that after attaining nirvana, Buddha uttered the following words. And what I narrate is a translation, of course. And it goes like this. Through birth and rebirth's endless round, pain in vain I hastened on, to find who framed this edifice, what misery birth incessantly. O builder, I have discovered thee, this fabric thou shalt never rebuild. Thy rafters all are broken now, and pointed roof demolished lies. This mind has demolition reached and seen the last of all desire. For 7 weeks, Buddha remained in Bodh Gaya, experiencing the bliss of nirvana and pondering over the future course of his action. Initially, he thought that he would live a life of seclusion, since it would now be difficult to communicate with the common people about the revealed knowledge. But then he was filled with compassion and love for the suffering beings and decided to reveal the truths to the common people. He moved to Benares, where he found his 5 former associates, from where he learned the practice of extreme austerities. And they organized a grand event where Buddha delivered his first sermon, which in the Buddhist canon is called the setting in motion the wheel of Dharma. Now, his first sermon contains the fundamental teachings of Buddhism. It is said that on hearing the first sermon, these 5 associates of Buddha attained nirvana and were called arhats or saints after that. Now you may wonder why they were not given the title of Buddha despite attaining nirvana. If you remember, I said in the beginning that Buddha is one who attains nirvana on his own, without the mediation of another. So, they were called arhats. Now let us understand what exactly Buddha revealed in his first sermon. He revealed the 4 Arya Satyas, which are translated as the 4 Noble Truths. And they are number 1, the truth of suffering, Dukkha Satya. Number 2, the truth of causation, Samudaya Satya. Number 3, the truth of cessation, Nirodha Satya. And number 4, the truth of the way, Marga Satya. Now, what do these truths mean? The first truth declares that there is suffering everywhere. There is suffering in birth, there is suffering in sickness, there is suffering in old age, and there is suffering in death. If we are close to what we dislike, there is suffering. If we are away from what we like, there is suffering. If there is change, there is suffering, and everything changes. For change is unavoidable. So, there is suffering in every bit of existence. But the fact of the world is that people find it hard to acknowledge this truth. Anyway, the Buddhist theory of impermanence, which later became the theory of momentariness, emerges from the first noble truth. The second noble truth declares that everything has a cause, and so does suffering. But what is the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering is the cravings and desires that we nurture. It gives rise to our thirst for existence, which occasions rebirth. Now, from this second noble truth emerges the theory of causation, called the theory of dependent origination or pratitya samutpad, which explains the theory of impermanence or momentariness in a comprehensive manner, which I will explain in some time. Now, the third noble truth declares that this cause of suffering can be destroyed. This happens when the cravings and desires are extinguished. When one withdraws oneself from the objects of these cravings and rejects them completely. When one becomes capable to renounce everything, from this noble truth emerges, you would know, the Buddhist theory of nirvana. And the fourth noble truth declares that there is a way to destroy the cause of suffering. Now, the first three noble truths deal with the metaphysical aspect of suffering. And in the fourth noble truth, Buddha preached the ethical path called the Eightfold Path, which, if practiced with complete dedication, pulls one out from this world full of suffering. Now it's time to understand the Buddhist theory of impermanence or anityavad. There is suffering. There are feelings of pain and dissatisfaction. Now, when the Buddha says this, he does not mean the ordinary sufferings of life, like what one feels on a very hot day in the month of June, or when one has fever. Rather, he refers to the existential suffering, which in simple words means not getting what one wants. And this gives rise to frustration and distress. A man throughout his lifetime fights the discordance between what he wants and the situation he is in. There is a natural tendency in man to long for an immortal, unchangeable, pleasant, consistent, and coordinated life. However, the reality is quite the opposite. There is decay, death, dissatisfaction, disease, and whatnot. And these he witnesses on a daily basis. This incompatibility or discordance between his wish and reality takes away the whole meaning, value, and purpose of his life. If one knows that he is not immortal and will die, what significance would any event or object have for him? How can he feel happy about any of his possessions or achievements if eventually he is going to die? The world will not be affected if he is no longer in it. But suppressing all these fears, he continues to live with the hope that he will not die anytime soon. One is also affected by the day-to-day painful experiences, because these experiences tell him loud and clear what he is and what he is heading for. These experiences may range from a minor toothache to a major heart attack. They may include despair from not getting a job and even the fear of losing a job. Now, these negative experiences run through our whole lives and hinder our limited ability to take pleasure in the ordinary things of life. One is always conscious of the fact that pleasures do not last. With time, they diminish and disappear. Here, I would like to narrate a story from the Dhammapada, a Buddhist text, and it goes like this. There was a very attractive and beautiful girl by the name of Rupa. She was highly admired by people. All the members of her family joined the Buddhist Sangha, but she hesitated to do so as she was told by people that Buddha gave no importance to the beauty of the body and discouraged those who did so. But since she was missing her family members, she gathered courage and went to see them. When Buddha saw her, he at once realized how obsessed she was with her beauty. So he decided to teach her a lesson and gave a vision to her, in which she saw a heavenly gorgeous woman. Seeing her, she thought to herself that in comparison to the beauty of this woman, I look so ugly. And while she was thinking, she immediately saw this woman aging and her beauty fading away and finally dying in sickness. She saw her corpse lying in the pungent fluids coming out of her body. This whole scene made Rupananda realize that change is inevitable. Just as this woman grew old, decayed, and died, she too will experience these changes in her life. And with this realization, her attachment towards her body vanished. And later, under the guidance of Buddha, she attained arhatship. The Impermanence Theory is closely linked with the Buddhist theory of no soul or Anatmavad. Buddha declared that we experience suffering because we wish to believe impermanent as permanent. So, for Buddha, there is no permanent self, which implies persons are not ultimately real. Let us delve on the notion of the self first and understand why Buddha is against this notion of self. Philosophically, the term self refers to the essence of a person, by virtue of which the person continues to exist. It is the identity of a person which does not change even if the person undergoes bodily and mental changes. This self enables him to refer to himself with the word I in all the experiences that he has and the actions that he performs in the various stages of his life. So, self is something that continues to exist all the time, past, present, and future. And if we consider the notion of self of the non-Buddhist schools, we find that they regard it as simple, eternal in the sense of being permanent and not made of parts. Now, Buddha understands self not as a simple, eternal, impartite, and permanent essence of a person. It is obvious also that Buddha cannot have such a stance because of his belief in impermanence. He rather brings in the doctrine of 5 Skandhas to understand what a person is. And the 5 Skandhas are: number 1, form or Rupa. Number 2, feeling or Vedana. Number 3, perception or Samgya. Number 4, volition or Samskara. Number 5, consciousness or Vijnana. Form or Rupa concerns matter in the sense of having a physical form and a shape. Feeling or Vedana comprises of the sensations of pleasures, pains, and indifference. Perception or Samgya concerns with understanding and recognition, in the sense of the smell of a rose, or grasping something as red in color. Volition or samskara concerns all bodily and mental activities, and consciousness or vijnana is awareness of material as well as mental states. These 5 skandhas or aggregates collectively are called nama rupa. The term nama stands for the 4 skandhas other than rupa. So, rupa refers to the body and nama refers to that which can be named. Now, what we have to understand here is that rupa or body or form of the material object can be perceived by the sense organs. But the skandhas under the category of nama cannot be perceived because they are not observable by the senses. We can only talk about them using the words which denote these 4 private states of feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. Buddha, through the doctrine of skandhas, rejects the notion of a permanent self or Atman, because the skandhas themselves are impermanent, and anything that is impermanent cannot give rise to something that is permanent. And he explains it beautifully with many analogies. One of which is where he compares the person or the self with a chariot. Now, a chariot is made up of various parts, such as the wheels, the chariot body, the pole, the axle. Now, a question arises: is the chariot something more than its parts? The answer is, of course not. If we dismantle the chariot part by part, it will cease to be a chariot. Similarly, the self, referred to as I, is nothing more than the 5 skandhas, arranged in a certain manner. And at the time of death, the 5 skandhas dissolve. If one tries to analyze each and every skandha separately, he will not find any self attached to any of them. But again, a question arises. If the skandhas are impermanent, how one is to account for the self as one entity which remains the same in all the experiences of past, present, and future? Also, who is reborn? Since rebirth is a big issue here. Now understand, Buddha claims that the 5 skandhas are constantly in a state of flux, that is, change. But because the succession of one set of skandhas by another set of skandhas is so rapid that one fails to recognize the change or difference and identifies the two as the same, and one gets the false impression of identity. And here, nama, comprising of the 4 skandhas, plays its role in calling the person by the same name and as having the same identity. The Buddha explains this with the analogy of the flame. Now, if we light a lamp, it will burn the whole night. What do you think? Will the flame of the lamp in the first part of the night be the same in the middle part of the night? The answer is no. Now, will the flame in the middle part of the night be the same as the flame in the last part of the night? Again, the answer is no. Now, what do we infer from this? We infer There was one flame in the first part of night, second flame in the middle part of night, and third flame in the last part of night. But what sort of inference is this? This too is not correct. The proper answer is the third flame depended on the second and the second on the first. And this is what happens in the case of the 5 skandhas. One skandha perishes and the other arises with no apparent gaps between the two events. And this rapid succession or the causal process makes us see the person as one and the same. Now let us consider the process of rebirth. The question is, who is getting born again if there is no such thing as permanent self or Atman? The two claims, number one, that there is rebirth, and two, that there is no permanent self, are inconsistent with each other. Now Buddha resolves this inconsistency with the same causal process, in which one set of skandhas gives rise to another set of skandhas, but this time in the form of a new life, which technically means that the karmas are transferred from one life to another. And here I am reminded of a dialogue which happens between King Milinda and Nagasena, and which is from the Buddhist text Milinda Panho, where the king asks Nagasena the question, what is that which is born into the next existence? And while replying, Nagasena gives the following illustration which beautifully answers the question. He says, Your Majesty, it is as if a man were to light a fire in the winter time and warm himself, and were to go off without putting it out. And then the fire were to burn another man's field, and the owner of the field were to seize him and show him to the king and say, Sir, this man has burnt up my field. And the other were to say, Sir, I did not set this man's field on fire. The fire which I failed to put out was a different one from the one which burnt up this man's field. I am not liable to punishment. Pray, Your Majesty, would the man be liable to punishment? Assuredly, sir, he would be liable to punishment. For what reason? Because, in spite of what he might say, the man would be liable to punishment for the reason that the last fire derived from the first fire. In exactly the same way, Your Majesty, with this nama and rupa, one does a deed. It may be good or it may be wicked, and by reason of this deed, another nam and rupa is born into the next existence. Therefore, is one not freed from one's evil deed. A little further analysis makes Buddha's claim about the self, in fact, I should say not self, anatma, even clearer. A person is divided into 12 spheres of experiences called ayatanas. They are the 6 sense organs, namely eye, ear, nose, tongue, skin, and mind. And the 6 objects of the senses, namely color, sound, smell, taste, touch, and the object as a whole. In contrast to the first 5 sense organs, that is eye, ear, nose, tongue, and skin, which perceive only one aspect of an object, the sixth sense organ, which is mind, perceives the object in its totality. If we consider the being of a person, then the Buddha gives a list of 18 elements or dhatus. They are the 6 sense organs, the 6 objects of the senses, and the 6 kinds of cognitions brought about by the senses. And they are the visual, the auditory, the olfactory, the gustatory, the tactile, and the mental. This is an exhaustive analysis of the so-called self or the being of a person. And the Buddhist tradition proves anatmavad and impermanence with this. For nothing remains as residue after this exhaustive analysis, and none of these in any way can be regarded as permanent. And this will become clear in the theory of dependent origination or pratitya samutpad, which I will take up in the next lecture. Thank you so much.